Close your eyes right now. Go ahead, do it. In that darkness, where did the world go? Your room, your screen, the light, it all vanished. But here's the question that has haunted humanity for millennia. Did it really disappear, or did you just stop creating it? When you open your eyes again, are you discovering reality, or are you quite literally bringing it into existence? Welcome to Logic Over Spirit, where we tackle the biggest questions at the intersection of reason, belief, and existence. Today, we are diving into perhaps the most mind-bending question in all of human thought. Does consciousness create reality, or does reality create consciousness? This isn't just philosophical navel-gazing. This question sits at the heart of everything we think we know about existence. It determines whether you're a passive observer in a universe that existed long before you and will continue long after, or whether you're an active participant, literally shaping the fabric of reality with your awareness. Scientists have measured it in quantum laboratories. Mystics have meditated on it in mountain caves. Philosophers have debated it in academic halls for thousands of years, and yet, we still don't have a definitive answer. But we have something better. We have compelling evidence and arguments from three of humanity's greatest knowledge systems: science, religion, and philosophy. Each offers a radically different perspective, and by the end of this exploration, you'll have the tools to decide for yourself where you stand on perhaps the deepest mystery of existence. So let us begin our journey at the place where this question first emerged from abstract thought into concrete evidence. The Quantum Laboratory. Chapter 1: The Quantum Mind Bomb. In 1961, a physicist named Claus Janssen conducted an experiment that should have been simple. He fired electrons, tiny particles of matter, through two slits and observed where they landed on a screen behind them. What he discovered defied every intuition we have about reality. When no one was watching, the electrons behaved like waves, creating an interference pattern, as if each electron somehow went through both slits simultaneously. But here's where it gets weird. The moment Janssen set up detectors to observe which slit the electron went through, the wave pattern collapsed. The electrons suddenly behaved like particles, going through one slit or the other. The act of observation changed physical reality. This wasn't a glitch or experimental error. This is the famous double-slit experiment, and it's been replicated thousands of times with the same mind-bending result. Nobel Prize-winning physicist Eugene Wigner put it bluntly: it was not possible to formulate the laws of quantum mechanics in a fully consistent way without reference to consciousness. But before we crown consciousness as the creator of reality, we need to understand what's really happening here. The standard interpretation, called the Copenhagen interpretation, suggests that particles exist in a state of superposition, occupying all possible states simultaneously, until they're measured. The measurement collapses the wave function, forcing the particle to choose a definite state. Now, does this mean consciousness creates reality? Not so fast. Many physicists argue that observation doesn't require a conscious mind. Any interaction with a measuring device, conscious observer or not, causes the collapse. The thermometer doesn't need to think about the temperature to measure it, yet the mystery deepens when we look at delayed choice experiments. In 1978, physicist John Wheeler proposed a thought experiment where the choice to measure could be made after the particle had already passed through the slits. When this was actually performed in laboratories, the results suggested that a measurement made in the present could influence what happened in the past. As Wheeler himself said, "We are participators in bringing into being not only the near and here, but the far away and long ago." The implications are staggering. If consciousness, or at least measurement, plays a role in determining physical reality, then the universe, before conscious observers existed, becomes a philosophical puzzle. Was the Big Bang a definite event? Or did it exist in superposition until the first conscious being emerged to observe its effects? This brings us to the quantum Zeno effect, where continuous observation can actually freeze a quantum system, preventing it from evolving. It's as if reality needs us to look away for it to change. Imagine watching a pot that literally cannot boil as long as you're watching it, and you'll get a sense of how bizarre quantum mechanics truly is. But here's the counterargument that keeps materialist scientists up at night. This theory suggests that quantum superpositions collapse not because of consciousness, but because particles interact with their environment. The universe is not a sealed quantum system. Everything is constantly interacting with everything else. And these interactions naturally cause wave functions to collapse into definite states. No consciousness required. So where does that leave us? Quantum mechanics shows us that at the smallest scales, reality is fundamentally uncertain until it's measured. Whether that measurement requires consciousness remains hotly debated. But one thing is clear: the solid, definite, objective reality we think we inhabit is far stranger than our everyday experience suggests. The quantum realm whispers a tantalizing possibility. Perhaps consciousness and reality are more intimately connected than the materialist worldview admits. But to explore this connection further, we need to turn from laboratories to temples, from particle accelerators to prayer wheels. Chapter 2: The Divine Mind and Sacred Creation. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So begins the Gospel of John, establishing a principle that echoes across religions. Consciousness, divine awareness, came before physical reality. This isn't unique to Christianity. In Hinduism, the concept of Brahman describes an ultimate consciousness from which all reality emanates. The universe isn't created by a consciousness separate from it. The universe is consciousness experiencing itself. The ancient Upanishads declare, Tat-tvam-asi, you are that. Your individual consciousness is not separate from the universal consciousness that creates and sustains reality. Let's pause here because this is crucial. Most Western religions position God as a conscious creator who made reality as something separate from himself. Eastern religions often argue that reality is not separate from divine consciousness, but rather an expression or manifestation of it. This difference matters enormously for our question. If God created reality as something separate, then consciousness, divine consciousness, at least, came first and created reality. But that reality now exists independently. The tree falling in the forest makes a sound whether God is listening or not, because God made a universe with consistent physical laws. But if reality is not separate from divine consciousness, if it's a continuous manifestation or dream of the ultimate awareness, then consciousness doesn't just create reality once, it creates it continuously, moment by moment. Stop the consciousness, and reality winks out of existence, like a dream dissolving upon waking. The Buddhist tradition offers another angle entirely. Buddhism teaches that both consciousness and reality as we know them are illusions. Or more precisely, they're impermanent and without inherent existence. The Buddha taught that what we call self is a construct, and what we call reality is a web of interdependent phenomena. In this view, asking whether consciousness creates reality is like asking whether the left side of a coin creates the right side. They arise together, interdependently, neither having ultimate priority. Islamic Sufism introduces the concept of wadat, al-wujud, the unity of being, where all existence is understood as a manifestation of divine consciousness. The 13th century mystic Rumi wrote, "You are not a drop in the ocean, you are the entire ocean in a drop." Reality, in this view, is divine consciousness experiencing itself through infinite perspectives. Now, here's where it gets interesting for our investigation. Many religious traditions contain practices specifically designed to demonstrate the power of consciousness over reality. Prayer, meditation, visualization. These aren't just psychological exercises. They're based on the belief that consciousness can directly influence physical reality. Consider the placebo effect, which modern medicine has documented extensively. Believing you've taken medicine can produce measurable physiological changes, even if you've only taken a sugar pill. Is this consciousness creating reality, or is it merely consciousness influencing the already physical body through psychological pathways? Religious traditions would argue it's the former. They point to reported miracles, healings, manifestations, events where consciousness appears to violate physical laws. Skeptics counter that these are either misperceptions, coincidences, or natural phenomena misunderstood. But religion offers something science cannot: subjective experience as valid evidence. When a mystic reports experiencing unity with all existence, when a meditator describes consciousness without content, pure awareness itself, these experiences may not be measurable by instruments, but they're real to the experiencer. And if consciousness is indeed fundamental, then subjective experience might be the only way to truly understand it. The religious perspective fundamentally challenges materialism's assumption that objective, measurable reality is more real than subjective experience. What if, religions ask, subjective experience is the primary reality, and the material world is secondary, derivative, created by and from consciousness itself? This brings us to perhaps the most provocative religious claim, that you, personally, are creating your reality right now. Not the physical universe, perhaps, but your experienced reality. The New Thought movement in Christianity, Shakti in Hinduism, the concept of mind over matter in various traditions, all suggest that individual consciousness shapes individual reality. Is this true? Can you think yourself rich, healthy, or happy? The evidence is mixed. Positive thinking clearly affects behavior, which affects outcomes. But can consciousness directly alter physical reality without physical intermediaries? Religion says yes. Science says prove it. And that tension brings us to our next domain of investigation. Before we get there, consider this. whether or not consciousness literally creates reality in a metaphysical sense. Religion has demonstrated that belief shapes experience so profoundly that the distinction might not matter. If you believe consciousness creates reality, you act differently, experience differently, live differently. In that sense, consciousness creates your reality whether it creates the reality or not. Chapter 3. The Philosopher's Dilemma. I think, therefore I am. When René Descartes wrote these words in 1637, he believed he had found the one certain foundation for all knowledge. You can doubt everything, your senses, your memories, the entire physical world, but you cannot doubt that you are doubting. Consciousness, the act of thinking itself, is the only thing you can be absolutely certain exists. This seems to settle our question. Consciousness comes first, reality second. Not so fast. Descartes' certainty gave birth to a problem that has plagued philosophy ever since. If all you can be certain of is your own consciousness, how do you know anything else exists? How do you know other people are conscious and not just philosophical zombies, behaving as if conscious but actually empty inside? How do you know you're not a brain in a vat, stimulated by electrodes to experience an illusory reality? George Berkeley took this seriously and arrived at a radical conclusion. Reality is consciousness. Nothing exists except minds and ideas. The desk you're sitting at, the device you're watching this on, they exist only as perceptions in consciousness. To be is to be perceived, he wrote. When you leave the room doesn't exist anymore, unless God is perceiving it, which Berkeley believed he always was. This is called idealism, the philosophy that consciousness is fundamental and matter is derivative. It's the philosophical version of consciousness creates reality. But then came the materialists, armed with evolution. David Hume and later philosophers argued that this gets everything backward. Reality existed for billions of years before consciousness evolved. Consciousness is not fundamental. It's an emergent property of complex material systems, specifically brains. Stars and galaxies existed long before anyone was around to perceive them. Consciousness didn't create reality. Reality created consciousness. This materialist view dominates modern philosophy and science. It's intuitive, it matches our everyday experience, and it's supported by evolutionary biology. Simple organisms with simple nervous systems have simple consciousness. Complex organisms with complex brains have complex consciousness. Damage the brain, and consciousness changes or disappears. The evidence seems overwhelming. Consciousness is what brains do, but idealism refuses to die, and for good reason. The philosopher Thomas Nagel wrote a famous paper titled, "What is it like to be a bat?" His point was that consciousness has an irreducibly subjective quality. There's something it's like to be conscious. An inner experience that cannot be captured by objective, third-person descriptions of neural firing patterns. This is called the hard problem of consciousness, coined by philosopher David Chalmers. Science can potentially explain how brains process information, respond to stimuli, and form memories. These are the easy problems, though they're not actually easy. But explaining why any of this is accompanied by subjective experience, by what it feels like to see red or taste coffee or feel love, that's the hard problem. And we have absolutely no idea how to solve it. Here's why this matters for our question. If consciousness cannot be reduced to physical processes, if subjective experience is something fundamentally different from objective matter, then maybe the materialists have it backward. Maybe consciousness isn't created by reality. Maybe, as idealists argue, consciousness is a fundamental feature of the universe. Perhaps the fundamental feature, and matter is somehow constructed from or within it. This leads to panpsychism, the view that consciousness is everywhere, a basic property of matter itself. Just as matter has mass and charge, it has consciousness. Simple particles have incredibly simple consciousness. Complex arrangements like brains have complex consciousness. In this view, consciousness doesn't create reality, or vice versa. They're two sides of the same coin, two aspects of a more fundamental unity. The philosopher Bertrand Russell approached this differently. He argued for neutral monism, the idea that both consciousness and matter arise from some more fundamental substrate that is itself neither mental nor physical. Reality is like a coin, consciousness is one face, matter the other, but the coin itself is neither. But perhaps the most challenging philosophical position comes from Immanuel Kant. He argued that we can never know reality as it is in itself, only as it appears to us through the structures of our consciousness. Space, time, causality. These aren't features of reality itself, but features of how our minds structure experience. In this view, consciousness doesn't exactly create reality, but it creates our reality, the only reality we can ever know. This brings us to a crucial distinction, is the question: does consciousness create reality? Even well-formed. What do we mean by reality? If we mean the universe as it exists independent of any observer, then that's one thing. If we mean reality as we experience it, the world of colors and sounds and meanings, then that's another thing entirely. Philosophers call this the difference between the world as it is in itself and the world as it appears to us. Science studies appearances, correlating our observations with mathematical models. But does science ever break through to reality itself? Or are we forever trapped inside consciousness, looking out at a reality we can infer but never directly know? The philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein suggested that some questions are nonsensical because they're asked in the wrong framework. Asking whether consciousness creates reality might be like asking what color Tuesday is. The question assumes a relationship between consciousness and reality that may not match how things actually are. And yet, we cannot escape the question. Every moment of your life, you're experiencing consciousness, encountering what seems to be reality. Are you creating it? Discovering it? Some complex combination of both. Philosophy has given us frameworks and insights, but not answers. Perhaps that's because the answer requires a synthesis. A way of understanding that transcends the limitations of any single approach. To move toward that synthesis, we need to examine what happens at the boundary where these perspectives meet. Chapter 4: The Intersection of Perspectives. Now we've seen three radically different approaches to our question. Science suggests reality existed first, and consciousness emerged from it, though quantum mechanics hints at something stranger. Religion places consciousness first, specifically divine consciousness, as the creator of reality. Philosophy reveals that the question itself may rest on unexamined assumptions about what consciousness and reality actually are. So who's right? Here's what's fascinating. Each perspective reveals something true, while missing something crucial. Science's strength is its method, hypothesis, experiment, verification. This has given us an astonishingly accurate understanding of physical reality. We can predict planetary orbits, split atoms, sequence genomes. The predictive power of science is undeniable. But science has a blind spot. It can only study objects, things that can be measured from the outside. Consciousness, by its nature, is subjective, knowable only from the inside. Science can study the neural correlates of consciousness, but it cannot measure the experience itself. As the neuroscientist Christoph Koch, who has spent decades studying consciousness, admits, we have no idea how subjective experience arises from objective matter. We're not even close. Religion's strength is its recognition that subjective experience is primary. Before you can do science, before you can philosophize, you have to be conscious. Religion takes consciousness seriously as a fundamental feature of reality, not an accident or byproduct. But religion's weakness is its resistance to falsification. If you can explain every outcome as God's will, or karma, or divine plan, then you can't be wrong, which means you can't be right in a meaningful way, either. Philosophy's strength is its rigor in examining assumptions. Philosophers caught the problems with pure materialism long before scientists did. But philosophy's weakness is that it sometimes disappears into abstraction, analyzing concepts so minutely that it loses touch with lived experience. So what if we tried to synthesize these perspectives? What would emerge? Let's start with what all three agree on. There is consciousness, and there is something we call reality. Even if reality is an illusion, it's a remarkably consistent illusion. Even if consciousness is generated by matter, it still exists, so we have at minimum two phenomena that need to be understood in relation to each other. Here's a synthesis that respects all three perspectives. Consciousness and reality arise together in a dynamic, interdependent relationship. Neither is fully prior to the other. They co-create with each other moment by moment. Think of it this way. Imagine reality as a musical instrument, and consciousness as the musician. Neither creates music alone. The instrument without the musician has silent potential. The musician without the instrument has an unexpressed intention. Music emerges from their interaction. Or consider language. Does the word tree create the concept of tree in your mind, or does your concept of tree give meaning to the word? Obviously both. The word and the concept co-arise through their relationship. Neither is fully prior. This view, called codependent origination in Buddhism and relational ontology in philosophy, suggests that asking whether consciousness creates reality or reality creates consciousness is like asking whether the chicken or egg came first. The question assumes a linear causality that may not apply. From science, we take the recognition that reality has structures and patterns independent of individual consciousness. The laws of physics operated before humans existed and will continue after we're gone. From religion, we take the recognition that consciousness may be fundamental to existence, not merely a byproduct. From philosophy, we take careful analysis of what we mean by consciousness and reality in the first place. But this synthesis creates a new question. If consciousness and reality co-arise, what is the space in which they arise? What is the ground of being that allows both to exist? Some call it God. Some call it the quantum field. Some call it being itself. The label matters less than the recognition that our question may have been too narrow. We've been asking about the relationship between two things, consciousness and reality, without recognizing they might be aspects of something more fundamental. The physicist John Wheeler proposed the participatory universe, where observers and the observed are bound together in a creative dance. Reality isn't just out there waiting to be discovered, nor is it purely inherent as a creation of mind. It emerges in the interaction between observer and observed. This view has surprising support from modern neuroscience. Your brain doesn't passively receive reality like a camera. It actively constructs your experience based on sensory input and prior expectations. The color blue you see isn't in the light waves. It's constructed by your visual system. The solid table you're touching is mostly empty space at the atomic level. Your sense of solidity is a construction. But this doesn't mean reality is arbitrary. You can't think yourself through walls. The construction happens within constraints provided by actual external reality. You're co-creating your experience within a reality that has its own structure. Here's where it gets profound. If you and I are both co-creating reality through our consciousness, and our realities overlap and interact coherently, doesn't that suggest we're somehow participating in a shared consciousness or shared reality field? This is where individual consciousness might connect to something universal, bridging the gap between Eastern concepts of unity consciousness and Western concepts of individual minds in an objective world. But we need to test this synthesis against concrete experience. What does it predict? What does it explain that the individual perspectives don't? Chapter 5. The Evidence from Experience. Let's get practical. If consciousness and reality are co-creating each other, what should we observe? What actual experiences does this explain? First, meditation. Millions of people across thousands of years have reported that deep meditation alters their experience of reality. Time slows down or disappears. The boundary between self and world dissolves. Meditators report experiencing consciousness without content, awareness itself without any object of awareness. If consciousness were merely a product of brain activity processing external reality, how do we explain consciousness without content? It would be like a flashlight beam with nothing to illuminate, which shouldn't be possible. But meditators consistently report exactly this experience. Neuroscience is equally fascinating. Long-term meditators show permanent changes in brain structure. They have more gray matter in areas associated with attention and emotional regulation. Their brains show unusual synchronization patterns. But which came first? Did the brain changes create the altered consciousness, or did the altered consciousness create the brain changes? The evidence suggests both. Intention to meditate, a conscious decision, leads to practice, which changes the brain, which enables deeper meditation, which further changes the brain. It's a loop. Consciousness shapes the brain shapes consciousness, and both shape experienced reality. Second, the placebo effect. We mentioned this earlier, but it deserves deeper examination. Placebo effects can trigger the release of actual endorphins. They can reduce measurable inflammation. They can even cause objective changes visible on brain scans. Consciousness, in the form of belief, is creating measurable physical changes in reality. Now, materialists will argue this isn't really consciousness creating reality. It's consciousness triggering known biological mechanisms. But that doesn't fully satisfy. Why should believing you've taken medicine trigger the same mechanisms as actually taking medicine? Something about the conscious belief is having causal power over physical systems. Third, attention. Wherever you place your attention becomes more vivid, more detailed, more real in your experience. Right now, you probably weren't thinking about the feeling of your tongue in your mouth. Now you are. Did that feeling exist before you directed attention to it? In a sense, yes, the sensory signals were there. But in another sense, no. It wasn't part of your conscious reality until attention brought it into being. This isn't metaphorical. Attention literally changes neural processing. Attended stimuli generate stronger, more widespread activation in the brain. Attention shapes which version of reality you're experiencing from the infinite sensory data available. Fourth, perspective shifts. Have you ever had a moment where your entire understanding of a situation suddenly inverted? Maybe you saw someone's actions as malicious, then learned their true motive, and suddenly the same actions seemed loving. The physical facts didn't change. What changed was your consciousness, your interpretation, and with it, your entire experienced reality of the situation transformed. Reality presents itself differently based on the consciousness encountering it. The quantum physicist sees particles and waves. The artist sees color and form. The mystic sees the face of God. They're looking at the same reality through different consciousnesses and experiencing different realities as a result. Fifth, psychological research on perception. Your expectations dramatically shape what you perceive. In one famous experiment, people watching a video of basketball players were asked to count passes. Most completely missed a person in a gorilla suit walking through the scene. Their consciousness focused on counting, created a reality where the gorilla didn't exist for them. But here's the key question. These examples show consciousness shaping experienced reality. But do they show consciousness shaping actual, objective reality? This is where we hit the hard edge of the question. The skeptic says no. All these examples show that consciousness filters and interprets objective reality in various ways. The reality remains unchanged, only our experience of it changes. But then we return to quantum mechanics and ask, what is objective reality apart from any observation of it? Quantum mechanics suggests that at the fundamental level, there may not be a definite objective reality independent of measurement. Or if there is, we can never access it or know anything about it, which makes it pragmatically irrelevant. So perhaps the synthesis is this. Consciousness doesn't create reality from nothing, but it is necessary for reality to manifest in a definite form. Reality has potential, possibilities, propensities. Consciousness collapses those possibilities into actualities, into specific experiences and events. You didn't create the fact that objects fall when dropped. Gravity exists independent of your consciousness. But your consciousness is necessary to experience that fall, to interpret it, to give it meaning, to incorporate it into your understanding of reality. This is neither pure idealism nor pure materialism. It's a middle way that honors both the independence of reality and the necessity of consciousness. Chapter 6: The Limits of Knowing. We have explored three perspectives and attempted a synthesis, but we need to confront an uncomfortable truth. There may be fundamental limits to what we can know about this question. Thomas Nagel pointed out that consciousness has an irreducibly subjective character. You cannot know what it's like to be me, and I cannot know what it's like to be you. We can only know consciousness from the inside, from being conscious ourselves. But here's the paradox. To study something scientifically, you need to observe it objectively, from the outside. Science requires a third-person perspective. But consciousness is inherently first-person. The very act of trying to study consciousness scientifically might be impossible in principle, like trying to see your own eyes without a mirror. Philosopher Colin McGinn has argued for Mysterianism, the view that human minds may be constitutionally incapable of understanding consciousness, just as a dog can't understand calculus. Not because calculus is mysterious, but because canine cognition lacks the necessary architecture. Perhaps human cognition lacks what's needed to fully understand consciousness and its relationship to reality. This is a humbling possibility. We might be asking a question we're not equipped to answer, but there's another limit we need to consider, the limit of language itself. Language evolved to describe objects and actions in the everyday world. We have words for rock and tree and running because these were useful for survival. But consciousness and reality at their most fundamental might not be objects like things that language can capture. The Buddhist concept of nyat, emptiness, points to this. It doesn't mean nothingness, it means that reality resists conceptualization, that all our categories and labels are provisional and ultimately inadequate. The Tao Te Ching opens with the Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao. Some truths might be experienceable but not expressible. If that's the case, then our entire investigation might be like trying to catch the wind with our hands. We can feel it, we know it's real, but we can't grasp it in the way we grasp objects. This brings us to the role of direct experience versus conceptual understanding. Mystics across traditions claim that the relationship between consciousness and reality can be directly intuited through meditation or contemplation, but this understanding is non-conceptual. It's knowing without being able to say what you know. Western philosophy and science tend to privilege conceptual knowledge, knowledge that can be articulated and shared. Eastern traditions often privilege direct, experiential knowledge, knowing that transforms the knower but can't be fully communicated. Which type of knowing is more valid? Or are they complementary, each revealing aspects the other misses? There's also the limit imposed by our own consciousness being the instrument of investigation. When you try to understand consciousness, you're using consciousness to examine consciousness. It's like trying to see the back of your own head. You need a mirror, an external reference point, but where do you find a reference point outside consciousness to examine consciousness from? Some argue that's precisely what we need to accept, we're inside consciousness. And we can't get outside it to examine the relationship between inside and outside. This is why the question might be unanswerable in principle. But maybe unanswerable isn't the same as meaningless. Maybe the value is in the investigation itself. in seeing more clearly the miracle and mystery of existence, even if we can't fully explain it. The physicist Niels Bohr said, "If quantum mechanics hasn't profoundly shocked you, you haven't understood it yet." Perhaps the same is true of consciousness. If the relationship between consciousness and reality doesn't fill you with awe and confusion in equal measure, you haven't fully grasped the question. So where does this leave us? We've reached the boundary of what can be known with certainty. Beyond this boundary lies territory that each person must explore for themselves, through direct experience, through practice, through attention to the miracle of awareness, meeting reality moment by moment. Chapter 7: Practical Implications. This might all seem very abstract, but the way you answer our question has profound practical implications for how you live your life. If you believe reality creates consciousness, that you're a biological machine generating the illusion of awareness through neural complexity, then meaning is something you create, not something you discover. The universe is indifferent to your suffering and joy. You're a brief candle flame in an infinite dark. This can be liberating or terrifying depending on your temperament. This view leads to certain practical conclusions. You should probably maximize pleasure and minimize pain, since that's all consciousness is for. You should invest in neuroscience and psychology to understand the mechanisms of consciousness. You should be skeptical of anything that can't be objectively measured. And when you die, you should expect to simply cease, like a computer shutting down. But if you believe consciousness creates reality, that awareness is fundamental and matter derivative, practical life looks very different. If your consciousness shapes reality, then your thoughts, beliefs, and focus matter enormously. Positive thinking isn't just psychological, it's metaphysical. Meditation isn't just stress relief, it's reality engineering. And death might not be an ending, but a transition, since consciousness would continue even if the body doesn't. This view leads to different practices. You invest in developing consciousness through meditation, contemplation, and prayer. You pay attention to your beliefs and thoughts, treating them as creative forces. You look for meaning and purpose as real features of reality, not comforting illusions. And you might approach death with curiosity rather than fear. The synthesis view, that consciousness and reality co-arise, suggests a middle path. Your consciousness matters. It shapes your experienced reality and potentially influences events through attention, intention, and action. But you're not omnipotent. You can create reality within constraints. You're neither a powerless machine nor a reality-creating God, but something in between, a participant, a co-creator. This perspective leads to practices from both sides. You work with the material world, understanding its laws and patterns, but you also work with consciousness, developing greater awareness, clarity, and presence. You respect objective truth while honoring subjective experience. You recognize that while you can't control reality, absolutely, you have far more influence than pure materialism suggests. Let's get specific. Take a difficult situation in your life right now. If you're a pure materialist, you analyze the objective factors, look for mechanical solutions, and try to manipulate the external situation. This is valuable and often necessary. If you're a pure idealist, you work primarily with your consciousness, trying to shift your perception, release limiting beliefs, and visualize desired outcomes. This too can be valuable. The synthesis approach does both. You change what you can in the external situation while simultaneously working with how you're perceiving and responding to it. You recognize that the situation is neither purely objective nor purely subjective, but emerges in the relationship between your consciousness and external circumstances. This applies to health. Materialists focus on diet, exercise, medicine. Idealists focus on belief, stress reduction, and meditation. The synthesis does both, recognizing that mind and body are not separate but different aspects of a unified system. It applies to relationships. You can't control others through positive thinking, but your consciousness absolutely affects how you interpret their behavior and how you show up in the relationship, which influences how they respond to you. It applies to success and achievement. Visualization and belief matter, but so does actual skill development and hard work. Consciousness and reality work together. The practical upshot is this: treat both consciousness and external reality as real and influential. Don't fall into the trap of thinking everything is just matter or just mind. Reality is more subtle, more interactive, more participatory than either extreme suggests. And here is something that all three perspectives might agree on. Regardless of whether consciousness creates reality or vice versa, the consciousness you have right now is precious. It's your only window into existence. Whether it's a fundamental feature of the universe or an accidental byproduct of evolution, it's the most intimate thing you possess. Developing consciousness, becoming more aware, more present, more attentive to reality as it actually is rather than as you assume it to be, This is valuable under any metaphysical view. The materialist should do it to make better decisions. The idealist should do it to create a better reality. And those who aren't sure should do it because a more conscious life is simply a richer, fuller, more awakened life, whatever the ultimate nature of things. Chapter 8, Living with the Mystery. We have journeyed through quantum laboratories, religious traditions, philosophical arguments, and practical implications. We've examined the question from every angle available to us. And here's what we've discovered. We don't have a definitive answer. We might never have one. But that's not a failure. It's an invitation. The philosopher, Søren Kierkegaard, wrote, "Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards." We're in the middle of existence, using consciousness to investigate consciousness and reality to investigate reality. We're the ocean trying to understand water, and yet, something remarkable happens when you sit with this question deeply. The very asking changes you. You begin to notice consciousness itself, not just its contents. You start to see reality freshly, not through the filter of assumptions about what it is. There's a Zen koan that asks, "What was your face before your parents were born?" It's not meant to be answered logically. It's meant to short-circuit conceptual thinking and point you toward direct experience of consciousness beyond personal identity. Our question functions similarly. Does consciousness create reality, or does reality create consciousness? The question dismantles your certainty, and in that gap, something alive can emerge. Not an answer, but an awakening. Here's what we can say with confidence. You are conscious right now. Reality is appearing to you in some form. These are the only absolute certainties you have. Everything else, every scientific theory, religious doctrine, or philosophical argument, is an interpretation of this basic fact of awareness meeting existence. So what do you do with that? You could become a hard-nosed skeptic, doubting everything that can't be proven. You could become a believer, accepting a traditional answer that brings comfort and community. You could become a perpetual seeker, investigating without commitment. Or you could do something more radical. You could live the question, not by constantly thinking about it, but by becoming more conscious, more present, more attuned to the miracle that consciousness and reality are happening at all. The medieval mystic Meister Eckhart said, "The eye through which I see God is the same eye through which God sees me." In that moment of recognition, the question dissolves. Seer and seen, consciousness and reality, merge into a single unified experience. This doesn't mean adopting mysticism as your answer. It means recognizing that the relationship between consciousness and reality might be so intimate, so fundamental, that trying to separate them into cause and effect distorts the actual situation. Think about your experience right now. Are you consciously creating the light hitting your eyes, or is the light creating your conscious experience of seeing? The question seems to assume these are separate processes, but your actual experience is seamless. There's just seeing happening, consciousness and light, and neural processing all arising together as one event. The physicist Werner Heisenberg, one of the founders of quantum mechanics, wrote, "What we observe is not nature itself, but nature exposed to our method of questioning." The way we ask the question shapes what answers are possible. So perhaps the deepest wisdom is this: hold your theories lightly. Whether you lean toward consciousness creating reality, reality creating consciousness, or some synthesis, recognize it as a useful model, not ultimate truth. Reality itself is always more than our models of it, and in practical terms, live as if both consciousness and reality matter, because they clearly do. Develop your awareness. Engage with the world. Honor subjective experience. Respect objective evidence. Remain curious. Stay humble. The question we've been exploring is ultimately a question about your place in existence. Are you a passive witness to a universe that would exist just fine without you? Or are you an active participant, helping to shape reality through your consciousness? Or something between or beyond these options? Your answer affects how you experience meaning, purpose, agency, and hope. It affects what you think happens at death. It affects how you raise children, make decisions, face suffering, and celebrate joy. But here's the beautiful part. You don't need certainty to live fully. You can embrace the mystery while still committing to values, relationships, and purposes that matter to you. You can say "I do know" about the ultimate nature of consciousness and reality while still knowing what brings you alive. What calls to you, what feels true in your direct experience. The poet Rainer Maria Rilke wrote, "Be patient toward all that is unsolved in your heart, and try to love the questions themselves. Like locked rooms, and like books that are now written in a very foreign tongue. Do not now seek the answers, which cannot be given you, because you would not be able to live them. And the point is, to live everything. Live the questions now. Live the question. Does consciousness create reality? Does reality create consciousness? You're living the answer right now, in every moment of awareness, in every encounter with existence, not by thinking about it, but by being it. The mystics tell us that consciousness is reality, experiencing itself. The scientists tell us that reality gives rise to consciousness through complexity. The philosophers tell us that we might be asking the wrong question entirely. And you, right now, conscious and real, are the living proof that whatever the answer is, it's profound beyond measure. Conclusion. So where have we arrived? We started with a simple question. Does consciousness create reality, or does reality create consciousness? We've explored it through the lens of quantum physics, where observation seems to affect outcomes. We've examined it through religious traditions, where divine consciousness precedes and creates the material world. We've analyzed it philosophically, where the very terms of the question reveal hidden assumptions. Science shows us that consciousness correlates with brain activity and likely emerged through evolution. But quantum mechanics reveals a strange intimacy between observer and observer that we still don't fully understand. Religion tells us that consciousness is primary, that awareness is the ground of being from which all else flows. But it relies on subjective experience and faith rather than objective verification. Philosophy demonstrates that both consciousness and reality present deep mysteries, that knowing anything with certainty is harder than it seems, and that the question itself might need to be reformulated. The synthesis suggests that consciousness and reality co-arise, that they're interdependent rather than one being prior to the other, that you're participating in reality rather than simply observing it or creating it wholesale. But ultimately, this isn't a question that can be answered purely intellectually. It's a question that must be lived, experienced, embodied. Every moment of your life, consciousness and reality are meeting, interpenetrating, dancing together. You don't need to understand how it works to participate fully in it. In fact, the participation itself might be the deepest form of understanding available. What matters is this: you are aware, reality is manifesting. And in the space between and within these two facts lies every possible human experience: meaning, purpose, love, discovery, creation, suffering, and transcendence. Whether consciousness creates reality or reality creates consciousness, you are the meeting point. You are where it's all happening. And that makes you cosmically significant, regardless of which metaphysical view is correct. The question we've explored today is not just academic, it's personal. It's about who you are, what you're doing here, and what's possible for you. It's about whether the universe is cold and mechanical or alive and conscious. It's about whether meaning is something you have to create from nothing or something you discover as an inherent feature of existence. My invitation to you is this: don't settle for easy answers. Keep investigating, keep questioning. Try meditation to explore consciousness directly. Study science to understand the material world. Read philosophy to sharpen your thinking. Engage with religious and spiritual traditions to encounter wisdom that's been tested across millennia. But above all, pay attention to your actual experience. Notice consciousness itself. Observe how reality appears to you. Investigate the relationship between your awareness and the world you're aware of. Because ultimately, you are the laboratory where this question is being answered. Moment by moment, breath by breath, experience by experience. The 20th century philosopher Alan Watts put it perfectly: through our eyes, the universe is perceiving itself. Through our ears, the universe is listening to its harmonies. We are the witnesses through which the universe becomes conscious of its glory, of its magnificence. Whether consciousness creates reality, reality creates consciousness. Or they create each other, this much is certain. You're here, aware, and that's a miracle worth investigating for your entire life. If this exploration has sparked something in you, don't let it end here. This is where your real investigation begins. Subscribe to Logic Over Spirit if you haven't already, because we're going to continue diving deep into questions like this. Questions that sit at the intersection of reason, belief, and existence. We tackle the ideas that matter, the ones that change how you see yourself and the world. Drop a comment below and tell me, where do you land on this question? Do you think consciousness creates reality, reality creates consciousness, or something else entirely? What evidence or experience informs your view? Let's create a community of people willing to think deeply about what matters most. Share this video with someone who loves big questions. Send it to that friend who's always pondering existence, or that family member who thinks philosophy is impractical. This conversation needs more voices, more perspectives. More people willing to sit with mystery rather than defaulting to comfortable certainty. And here's a practical suggestion. Try this experiment for the next week. Each day, take 5 minutes to simply observe your consciousness. Not thinking, not analyzing, just noticing that you're aware. Notice how reality appears in consciousness. Notice the relationship between your awareness and what you're aware of. See what you discover through direct investigation rather than theory. You might not solve the ultimate mystery, but you'll develop a more intimate relationship with consciousness itself, and that changes everything. The question of consciousness and reality isn't just philosophical entertainment. It's the foundation of how you understand your life, your purpose, your possibilities. It deserves your attention, your investigation, your live engagement. So let's keep exploring together. Let's choose logic over dogma, but let's also honor spirit and subjective experience. Let's be rigorous in our thinking, but remain open to mystery. Let's build a community of people who aren't afraid of the biggest questions, even when they don't have easy answers. Until next time, stay curious, stay conscious, and keep questioning everything. This is Logic Over Spirit, reminding you that the universe is vast, consciousness is profound, and you're right in the middle of the greatest mystery there is. Thank you for watching.